Good morning and welcome to Story Time one more time. Yes, and I hope you are ready for today's story, The Wedding Portrait by Innosanto Nagara. Good morning to you and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. And yes, I will give time for people to get settled, get ready, and be ready for story time. Yes, good morning to you. And remember that you can find story time right here on Facebook, 10:30 Pacific time every weekday, but also on our YouTube channel as well as Instagram. So do join us on all those platforms. Good morning to you. And of course, support our authors. Please do buy your books from the local bookstores to support the small businesses, or you can also get them wherever books are found. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. As for this book, please do check the link in the description to see where you can get yourself a copy. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Yes, how are you doing today? Let's see who's joined us. Good morning to you, Brian from Emerson. How are you doing? So glad you are here. Thank you for joining us. Yes, good morning to you. And Juliana, how are you? Thank you. Danny, how are you doing? Good morning to you, Leslie. Good morning to you, Isabella. And of course, good morning to you, Luis. How are you doing today? Thank you so much. Good morning to you, Nia. Good morning to you, Cairo. And yes, good morning to you, Naima. How are you doing today? And good morning to you, Dominique. How are you? Thank you so much for joining us today. Asta and Obsa, how are you doing? Thank you for joining us. Good morning to you. Yes. Good morning to you, Anders. And good morning to you, Ingrid. Good morning, good morning. Good morning to you, Terim Sonda. How are you doing, my brother? Good to see you. Yes, great catching up the other day. Thank you so much for the call. How are you doing? Yes, good morning, everybody. And good morning to you, Philip. How are you doing, my brother, all the way out in Zambia? Kwamushota, how are you doing, my brother? Good morning. Yes, thank you so much, Philip. How are you doing? One Colombian. Yes, good morning to you. Thank you so much. Carmen Garcia, how are you doing? Camden and Emery joining us from Los Angeles. How are you today? Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you for the lovely message. Thank you. Much appreciated. Good morning to you, Emery, and good morning to you, Camden. How are you? Good morning to you, Rain, and good morning to you, Rachel. Thank you for joining us on this lovely Wednesday. Thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing? Yes. Good morning to you, Obsa, one more time. Thank you so much. Ali and Tai Tai from Sunshine in LA. How are you doing? Yes, enjoy that sunshine. How are you doing? Good morning to you, Janvetta. How are you doing today? Thank you so much for joining in as always. I hope you are ready for The Wedding Portrait by Innosanto Nagara. Good morning to you. Good morning to you, Vanessa. How are you doing? And you're joining in with Isla and Penelope. How are you today? Thank you so much for joining in. Harmony Beth, how are you? Thank you so much for joining us. Ellen in Chicago, how are you doing? Sunshine again. Wow. Awesome. Enjoy it. Good morning to you. JJ and Frankie, how are you doing? Out in Lanzarote, Spain, how are you doing today? Thank you so much for joining us. Yes, you're saying another bedtime story. Great, great, great. Glad to be part of that. Thank you so much. Good morning to you. Oh, how are you doing? Whiteson Chavula joining in with Mono, Lee, Natasha, and Violet all the way out in Lusaka. How are you doing today? Thank you so much for joining us. Good morning to you. Luis, Leslie, and Isabella right here in Oakland. How are you one more time? Yes, good morning to you. Good morning to you from San Francisco. Talia, how are you doing today? And Rita Bobita, how are you? Thank you so much for joining us. I am glad you are here. Good morning to you. Yes, thank you, thank you, thank you. And before we get started, of course, we'll give it one more minute and then we're just going to go into our story. I am super excited. Good afternoon to you, Terry. Thank you so much for joining us. Yes. Jillian, how are you doing? Good morning to you. You're joining in with Shalev in Richmond, California. How are you doing? I hope I got your name correctly. Thank you so much for joining us. Yes, good morning to you. How are you? Thank you so much. Yes, we are going to be reading The Wedding Portrait by Innosanto Nagara. Yes, and this is our very own from Oakland, Innosanto Nagara. But of course, he was born in Indonesia. Yes, and you can read more about him in his profile later on our page. Thank you so much for joining in this morning. Yes, good morning to you. The Wedding Portrait. Let us get started with that one. But of course, before we go in, we just wanted to check in really quickly. Remember that a fun fact, do you know that the ring finger is called the ring finger because in ancient times there was actually a belief that a vein ran straight from that fourth finger all the way straight to the heart. So that's where that comes from. Just one fun fact today. But now we're going to get ready and read The Wedding Portrait Part 1. Remember, only reading the first part today and we'll finish it off tomorrow. So get ready. The Wedding Portrait by Innosanto Nagara. When kids visit our house, they often ask about a particular photo that hangs on the wall. It's actually a cutout from a newspaper, but we put it in a frame and hang it up with the other family photos. It's a wedding portrait, a picture of two people dressed up for a wedding, kissing. Those two people are Mama and I when we got married. But as you can see, there is something different about this wedding portrait. What is that? But before I tell you about the portrait, I want to say something about breaking the rules. We usually follow the rules, but sometimes when you see something wrong, more wrong than breaking the rules, and by breaking the rules you could stop it, you may decide that you should break the rules. Yes. You know about segregation, right? That is when in some parts of the United States there were laws against black people. Black families were not allowed to live in white neighborhoods. Black children had to go to separate schools and drink from separate water fountains. And when you got on the bus, if you were black, you had to sit in the back. That was the law. But those laws were racist. The rules were wrong. So, some people decided to do something about it. Black activists would get on a bus and refuse to sit in the back. One of the first to do this was Claudette Colvin, who was just 15 years old at the time. The bus driver yelled at her, "Move to the back!" But she ignored him. The driver called the police and the policeman yelled at her too, "Move to the back or we will arrest you." And she ignored them too. The police arrested her. But then other people came in and sat in the front of the bus and refused to move. This happened over and over. Rosa Parks got on a bus and refused to move. The newspapers heard what was happening and came and took pictures. People from all over the country saw the pictures in the newspaper and more came. Some marched, some protested, others got on buses and refused to move to the back. And guess what? In the end, the laws were changed. This is called civil disobedience. People have been using civil disobedience to fight for freedom for a long time. For instance, the British Empire colonized India for hundreds of years. They stole their resources. They treated the people very badly. If anyone complained, they threw them in jail. And when people rebelled, the British used their army and guns to stop them. This was not good. So the people said, "Sorry, British Empire, but it's time for you to go home. And until you go, we won't be cooperating with you anymore." That play date was over. The British didn't want to go home and tried to force the Indian people to keep following their rules. But the Indian people stuck to their promise. When the British told them they couldn't make their own clothes, they made their own clothes anyway. When the British tried to get them to pay taxes, they ignored them. The British even tried to tell them they couldn't make their own salt from the sea, so thousands of people marched to the sea to make salt. Some of the leaders were arrested, but others took their place and did it again and again and again. Over 80,000 people were arrested for making salt. They didn't win right away, but guess what? In the end, the British had to go home. In Colombia, there is a nation of indigenous people who are called the Ua. If you are indigenous to a place, that means you and your ancestors have been there a long, long time. Thousands of years, basically forever. The Ua are also called the thinking people. Their homeland is known as Kajka Ika or Kire Chikara and includes the headwaters of the Orinoco River. It is a beautiful place. But their land is also a place where oil companies want to drill for oil. The Ua people knew that oil drilling only brings violence and environmental distraction. So they said, no thank you. But the oil companies ignored them and came anyway. So the Ua people decided to go to the place where the company was going to drill for oil and set up a camp. They blocked the road into the camp to keep the oil company trucks from coming in. This is called a blockade. People from all over the world heard about the blockade, and many went to the company's offices to protest along with the Ua people. This is called solidarity. They also called the people to stop buying that company's oil so that oil company wouldn't make any money. This is called a boycott. It took 10 years, but guess what? In the end, the oil company went home. Another boycott was one led by farm workers in Immokalee, Florida. These farm workers are the people who pick the tomatoes we eat. They work really hard in the hot sun and are not paid very much. In fact, some were being forced to work for no pay at all. This was a case of modern-day slavery. So the farm workers began to organize. They asked restaurant and supermarket owners to sign an agreement to only buy tomatoes from farms that treated their workers fairly. But the owners said, no way, we don't care about the farm workers. We like our tomatoes cheap. A lot of us don't have a lot of money, so we like our stuff cheap. We like our stuff cheap too, don't we? But think about it. If someone offered you a cheap tomato, but it was cheap because it was picked by a kid just like you who had to work all day for no pay and wasn't allowed to go home, would you buy it anyway? I thought so. No. I didn't think so. And the Immokalee workers didn't think so either. So they said, let's boycott those restaurants and supermarkets that don't care. They also held marches and rallies to let people know about the boycott. At one point, they marched almost 250 miles all the way to Orlando. People across the country stopped going to those restaurants and supermarkets. And guess what? In the end, the restaurants and the supermarkets decided they had better care. There are many different kinds of civil disobedience and direct action. There is a sit-in, the lockdown, the sick-out, the slowdown, the work-to-roo, the strike, the boycott, and the blockade. You can be a war tax resistor, a conscientious objector, a banner dropper, a tree sitter, a hunger striker, a plowsharer, or a whistleblower? And people are always finding new creative forms of civil disobedience. Black Lives Matter activists wanted to get rid of the Confederate flag. That's the flag of the people who wanted to keep slavery during U.S. Civil War. They lost the war and slavery was banned. But even though the flag is a symbol of racism, some state governments were still flying it. So, Bree Newsom and her friend James Tyson decided to do something about it. They got up really early one morning and went to the government building where the flag was flying. While her friends helped as lookouts, Bree climbed up the flagpole and took down the flag. This is called direct action. The police came and made her come down. Then they arrested her. But by then, lots of people had seen Bree on TV taking down the flag. They joined in demanding the flag come down. And guess what? Less than a month later, the flag was taken down for good. Now, I bet this is giving you some ideas, isn't it? Do you think of all the things that you do when you're not following the rules? Should it be considered civil disobedience? Do you think hiding under the bed to avoid taking a bath is a kind of sit-in? Is refusing to eat your dinner a kind of boycott? Maybe, maybe not. But I was supposed to be telling you about the wedding portrait. So join me tomorrow and find out the whole story of the wedding portrait. Thank you so much for joining in today. That is the end of part 1 of the wedding portrait by Innosanto Nagara. I hope you enjoyed that. Yes, it is an amazing book with lots of education, lots of relevant information right now for us, as we know that our country is going through so many things right now. And yes, we have to stand up and show up for everybody out there. Black lives do matter. And it is we have to take a stance. We have to be out there and make sure that we are heard so that everybody is treated fairly. Thank you so much for joining in today. And let's just see who else has joined us this morning for our reading. Yes, and be sure to join us tomorrow for part 2. All right, good morning to you one more time, Leslie, Louise, and Isabella. Thank you so much for joining us here in Oakland. I hope you enjoyed that one. Yes, it is very informative, so much information. Good morning to you, Dominique, one more time. Devin, how are you doing? Good morning to you, Kennedy, and of course, good morning to you, Latanya. How are you doing today? Penelope Evanson, thank you so much for joining us for part 1 of the wedding portrait. Thank you, thank you. Veronica and Lacey, thank you so much for joining us. I hope you're having yourself a lovely day. Yes, thank you so much for joining in. Natasha, how are you doing? Thank you so much for joining us. Good morning to you. Martha Ashley Mulenga, thank you for joining us. I hope you found that book informative and of course educational. Yes, good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us, and I hope everybody that was listening in is motivated to talk about these issues and of course to have conversations with our kids on how we can stand up for what is right. Good morning to you, Giada. Good morning to you, Santiago, and of course good morning to you, baby Marco in Sunnyvale. How are you doing today? Thank you so much. Thank you, Martha, much appreciated. Thank you so much, Rita, for joining us. And yes, I will see you again tomorrow. Yes, Jen Veda, totally agree. Such an inspiring book. Do join us for part 2 tomorrow. Thank you so much. Quincy, how are you doing? Is he joining us from a hike of Mount Tam? I hope you enjoyed that. Yes, thank you so much. And yes, we have a very important book with us today. Thank you so much, Innosanto Nagara. And of course, 7 Stories Press. Thank you so much for that amazing book. Thank you everybody for joining in. Thank you, Dominique, much appreciated. Yes, thank you so much, Carmen Garcia. Thank you so much for joining us. And yes, you say thank you for that inspiring. Yes, it is inspiring indeed. Thank you so much. Ellen, I will see you tomorrow for part 2. Thank you so much for joining us. Layla Momini, thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing? Asta, thank you. I will see you again. And Patrick Rice, thank you so much for joining us. Olive Oil, good morning to you. I am glad you could join us this morning. From me, it is much love as always. And tomorrow we are back for part 2 of the wedding portrait. Thank you so much for joining in. And yes, let us keep standing up and fighting for what is right. Good morning to you. Much love from me today. And I will see you in the morning. Bye-bye.